Melanocytes are cells in the stratum basale. They have a spider-like appearance. You can see that on the picture here. And they make melanin, which is a brown-black pigment. These melanocytes are always making melanin, always. But UV radiation actually provokes them to accelerate their production of melanin. And then the excess melanin, what it does is it accumulates on the apical surface, or the surface facing the UV rays, of the nucleus of the melanocyte, right? So this being the surface that faces the UV rays, it means that the melanin there will absorb that UV radiation before it gets to the nucleus of the melanocytes, before it mutates the DNA in the nucleus, and before it could generate a potentially cancerous mutation. A cancerous mutation in a melanocyte will create a melanoma, and it is one of the most aggressive cancers in skin. So a tan is actually your skin screaming out for you to stop bombarding it with UVA. In fact, a tan and the melanin that accumulates in it is your skin's way of trying to protect itself. The vesicles of melanin, they don't just stay inside of the melanocyte on the apical surface of the nucleus. Melanocytes, what they do is they transfer their melanin-rich vesicles to the other cells in the stratum basale and also to the surrounding keratinocytes. And you can see here in this picture, I have a melanocyte kind of doing that over on the right. As the keratinocytes move superficially, the melanin vesicles move with those keratinocytes. And eventually, when the cells die, those vesicles, they break down and release their melanin. The other cells in the stratum basale, such as the stem cells that are constantly creating keratinocytes, they receive the benefits of the UV-absorbing melanin as it accumulates between their nuclei and the incoming UV rays. Skin cancers are so named for the cells that they affect. The more aggressive a cancer, the less common it is, and that's true not only for skin cancers, but others. The opposite is also true. The less aggressive a cancer is, then the more frequently it will appear. The bottom pictures here, all three of those, are different types of melanomas. But the top row shows you some of the more common types of skin cancer, although I have to admit I have never heard of a Merkel cell carcinoma. A Merkel cell is an encapsulated ending of a sensory nerve. I don't know how rare or common those are. I'll have to look it up. A Merkel cell senses touch. A basal cell carcinoma is the cancer of any other cell than a melanocyte that's located in the stratum basale. These basal cell carcinomas are usually the stem cells that are supposed to make keratinocytes at a moderated rate. But now this stem cell is doing way too much mitosis, and it is overproducing those keratinocytes. A squamous cell carcinoma is cancer or too much division of a keratinocyte, not the stem cell, right? The keratinocytes are not supposed to divide by themselves, but a squamous cell carcinoma is one keratinocyte that has decided, I'm now going to divide. Keratinocytes are, all of them, are exposed to all of the different types of UV rays, UVA, UVB, UVC. If the DNA suppressing mitosis in a keratinocyte becomes mutated in such a way to release that suppression, the keratinocyte will start to divide and make a squamous cell carcinoma. Think about how much skin you would have to scoop out to get each of these types of cancer, right? How deep do you have to go? Right? Squamous cell carcinomas can be very superficially located, but basal cells and Merkel cells, basal cells and Merkel cells and melanomas are at the very bottom of the epidermis. There's something called a Mohs surgery. It's a surgery that can keep you at the hospital all day. They take some cells, they fix and stain them, they look at them under the microscope. 3 hours later, they do the same. 3 hours after that, they do it again. And they keep doing that until they get a sample with no cancerous cells. So I do have some friends that have been at Mohs surgeries. And there was one friend in particular who called me after the third round. And she said, this isn't good. But I did say to her, you're in exactly the right place, though, if it isn't good. How do you know if you have skin cancer? I mean, a doctor tells you. No, I'm sorry. Have a dermatologist tell you is probably the answer. There are some things that you can look for, which are listed here, but anything that might apply to a skin lesion that you should lead you to a dermatologist. All of these pictures here, the pictures here are all melanomas. However, A, B, C, D, and E are things that you can apply to any type of skin cancer. So side note, if a lesion on your skin meets all of these criteria, you should run, don't walk to a dermatologist, but also think positively. Melanomas, really common for people who have spent their childhood in the sunlight, right? Melanomas always meet all of these criteria. The things here, it's not that your mole is asymmetrical. I mean, I have asymmetrical moles, but they're not cancerous. But what's important is if that asymmetry has changed. Did the border of your mole go from smooth to wavy? Did the color of your mole change? Is it getting bigger? Right? So if the answer to any of these is it does now, but it didn't usually have that color. It does now, but it didn't usually have that diameter. It does now, but it didn't usually have that border. Those are all of the things that would encourage you to seek out a relationship with a dermatologist. And let me tell you, dermatologists, like when you call, they're like, yeah, we can see you in 6 months. So call today. I found this picture on the website that I use to generate the pictures for our class. And this is a great example of cancer in general, but more specifically, a melanoma. The additional cells of the tumor, they grow until they span the full layer thickness of the epidermis. And then as the melanoma grows, some pieces of it start to break off. At first, these pieces just deposit into nearby tissues or lymph nodes. True metastasis, which is stage 4 cancer, occurs when pieces of the tumor start appearing in distantly located tissues, the lungs and the spinal cord being the two most common places. Yes, there are other pigments in your skin than melanin. Carotene, of course, gives an orangey yellowish appearance and is present in the Asian gene pools as well as Eskimo lineages. Hemoglobin is the pigment in your blood that gives it either a ruby red color when oxygen is attached or a dark red, almost purplish color when oxygen is unattached. And bilirubin is the yellow pigment that is found in bile. No matter what pigments you make, and no matter in what abundance you make them, there are skin conditions that result from diseases or emotions. Cyanosis, or a bluish coloring, results from a dark reddish purplish color on your unoxygenated hemoglobin. Cyanosis can be found with anemias, poor circulation, emphysema, and a whole host of other diseases that either affect your ability to put oxygen into your blood or affect the ability of your blood to take on the oxygen. Erythema is blushing. This can also be the result of thermoregulation, not only emotions, when your body is trying to cool you down. Hot red blood is brought to the surface of the skin to allow the heat to dissipate. Erythema is, or has been in psychological literature, connected to the fight, flight, or freeze kind of sympathetic response. Pallor and cyanosis can be easily confused because they can be caused by similar conditions, all relating to oxygenation. However, pallor, which is a whitish color, and goosebumps go together often because when someone becomes frightened, they can raise their hair in goosebumps, or they can have an emotional response of all of the blood falling from their face. And I'm sure you've heard people say that. I was so frightened that all the blood just went out of my face. Jaundice, a yellowy color, occurs from an overabundance of bile, or that pigment called bilirubin. This yellowy pigment, which is actually excused in feces, this yellowy pigment can be easily seen in the whites of the eyes when it starts to accumulate in systemic tissues. Jaundice can come from a few very different problems, most of them relating back to the liver, which is the manufacturer of bile, but issues with the gallbladder and issues with lipid digestion in general can all lead to a mismanagement of bilirubin and jaundice. Bronzing is a very different condition than jaundice. However, it is often confused with jaundice because of this like yellowish, bronzy color. But bronzing actually does kind of make people appear shiny, like their skin really looks shiny. And it's the result of a disease called Addison's disease. This disease causes the overfunctioning of the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland starts pumping out cortisol to all of your systemic tissues. And cortisol is the low-level, long-term stress hormone. So this occurs as an interaction of both sweat glands and lipid metabolism. Carotenosis is a quite rare disease, and it's very easily seen in people who don't have a lot of melanin in their epidermis. So all of these coloration conditions are more easily seen in someone who does not have pigments between whoever's looking, between the skin and the dermal circulation. So carotenosis is often associated with newborn babies and first-time parents. Feeding your infant an abundance of carrot-based baby food can actually result in carotenosis. If the child has a skin type with very little melanin in it, the carotenosis in the subpapillary plexus and in the cutaneous plexus will be easily seen through all the layers of the melanin deficient epidermis. And just as a side note, my father did that to me. He fed me too many carrots when I was a baby, and that's exactly what happened.